In this episode, let's talk about version control. More specifically, let's talk about how to use Git with Unity. Git can make handling revisions in your Unity project much easier, and with a graphical interface called source tree, setting up a Git repository is not all that much extra work at all. Source tree is a free application available on both Mac and PC. It's a nice desktop client created by the company behind Bitbucket, a web-based hosting space for Git repositories. You can download and install Source Tree from the Source Tree app website. Just follow the instructions depending on whether you're using a Mac or a PC. The great part about Source Tree is that when you get the client application, Git and Git LFS comes bundled with it. With one installation, you can get everything that you need for Unity version control. Just make sure that once you have the Source Tree app downloaded and installed, you create a Bitbucket account as well. Inside of Source Tree, log into your account. The program needs that to validate your credentials to make sure that you are a legitimate developer. Again, just follow the instructions when installing the software. It will prompt you to add your account information. If you only want to use Git locally on a single PC or Mac and you're a solo developer, you can create a Git repository just on your local machine. That's the most basic way to use Git with Unity, and we'll dispense with using a remote repository in the cloud or collaborating with others for now. We're just going to use Git for basic vanilla version control. Let's create an example project and just walk you through those steps. Each Unity project that you're going to track with version control will have its own Git repository, or repo for short. For illustration, let's make a Unity project. From the Unity Hub, select a location to create it, and I'll make mine a 3D project with the built-in pipeline, and call yours whatever you want. Mine will be named Git Tutorial in these examples. When managing your project with version control, you do want to set up a couple of things to make Unity play nicely with Git. Go to the Edit Project Settings. Under the Version Control dropdown, usually you want to use Visible Meta Files. Unity creates these little bits of metadata for each asset in the project folder. This option makes those files unhidden by default, so you can keep track of them. Under Asset Serialization, make sure you choose Force Text. When Unity auto-generates files in your project, this will create text files instead of binaries, and that will make it easier for Git to resolve conflicts and track any changes. Once your project is set up, launch Source Tree, and we'll use this to create a new corresponding repository. And we'll do that simply by hitting the Create button up here. Browse for your Unity project, and usually the repo folder will be in the same location as your project folder. Source Tree should automatically fill in the repo name, Git Tutorial in my case, and the last dropdown should say Git instead of Mercurial. We want to use Git for version control. Hit Create, and you'll get a prompt that says you already have some files in the repo directory. Are you sure that's what you want? And we do, so hit Yes. The repo is labeled in the top tab here. At the bottom of the UI, you can see something that says File Status. On a Mac, the file status appears on the left side, but it does the same thing. The UI is just a little bit different. The middle pane says Unstaged Files, and you should see that's filled with all of these files that exist within our Unity project folder. There are dozens of files created by default, depending on what template you chose when you generated the project from the Unity Hub. If you're familiar with how Unity sets up its working directories, you'll know that it includes a lot of temporary or cache files that are handled automatically by the program. Now, we don't want to track those with version control. The library subfolder in particular is one where we definitely want to avoid tracking. It's filled with all these temporary files that Unity creates and rebuilds. We can safely ignore everything in here and not track changes to them. We also have a temp folder, and there's also a number of auto-generated files, some created by Unity, some by the operating system. There are lots of these types of files that we want to ignore. So we can tell Git to avoid tracking them with a special metadata file called a .gitignore. The .gitignore will vary depending on what type of project that you're interested in. Ours is Unity specific, so we want to use something tailored to Unity development. You can find a nice template for your .gitignore right here. Just go ahead and take a moment and familiarize yourself with everything in this file. This is basically everything that we want to skip. Again, this is just a metadata file that tells Git what to exclude from our repository. We can avoid tracking the library folder, the temp folder, and all sorts of files and directories that are automatically generated. This particular .gitignore has been crowdsourced from many users and generally should work well for most Unity projects. You just need to create a text file called .gitignore and store it in the top folder of your Unity project. And that should be the folder directly above the assets folder. Use a text editor like Visual Studio or Notepad to create that. Save it with a period in front of the name, .gitignore. The dot indicates a system file, usually something hidden from the user. If you're on a Mac, you may get a warning that you're saving a system file. And that's okay. It's not harmful in this case. Now, once you have the file created, copy and paste the contents of our template and save it to disk so that Git can see it. Go back to source tree and let's take a look at the file status tab again. The center left window has suddenly filtered all of the unstaged files. Our list has shrunk considerably because we're no longer concerned about the files described in the .gitignore. Everything remaining in this list are files that we do want to track. Now, our first step to doing that is moving everything into the staging area. This is just a temporary holding place for files that we're about to commit into the repository. You can stage individual files by selecting them and hitting Stage Selected, or you can just grab everything in your working copy using Stage All. Our list moves over to the top window that says Staged Files. The unstaged files list is now empty. This temporary staging area gives you a chance to change your mind and double check everything before you send it to the repository. You can always unstage an individual file if it's not ready. Once I commit, I'm basically putting everything into a permanent record. And usually you want to be especially careful that your changes are correct. So think of this as creating backup and restore points. It's always great to make sure that your project is in good working order at each one of these milestones. If you don't like this step of staging, you can disable it. Select this and switch to no staging. This will commit everything in one go when you're ready with no extra temporary holding area. That's uncommon though, and I don't recommend it, so I'm going to re-enable staging. Using the staging area gives you one last chance to double check the files before they go out. To commit, we just have to enter a description at the bottom. I'll just type in that we're creating a new blank project. We haven't really done anything yet. We've only set up a .gitignore. And this is going to be a clean, unadulterated starting point. We're just going to commit this for reference. And of course, to commit, we just press the commit button. Now, once we do our first commit, you can see our window blanks out and we're left with a message that says nothing to commit. That means our commit was successful. Source tree and Git track any files that have changed since our last commit. And because everything is currently up to date, there's nothing left to commit. Switch to the log history tab at the bottom. Again, for Mac users, the UI equivalent is on the left side instead of at the bottom. Otherwise, it's the same. And you'll see that we have a new entry in our graph. The new commit version has a record of who did the commit and when, important if you have a team of people working together. Each version also has a unique hash identifier. And more important than that, there's a description of what was committed. What we've done is create our first branch of the project source. And on the left, you'll see that we've created a new master branch. It's also tagged master in the description as well. Remember that you want to think of these commits as growing like a tree. The master branch is essentially the main trunk of our tree. And if you want to continue the analogy, for the first commit, basically we're just planting roots. You can see that we have a list of files that are part of that commit. So if you select each one, you can see the contents of each text file on the right. Because we've forced Unity to store our assets as text whenever possible, you can view them just like any other text file. Okay, well, that's our first commit. Now let's actually do something with our Unity project.